My name is Chloe Bennett, and for 18 years, I thought I knew what home meant. It was a small clapboard house in a coastal Maine town, where the air always smelled faintly of salt and pine. I lived there with my husband, Lucas, in a life that wasn't loud or flashy but felt like enough. At least, I told myself it was. I'm not sure when I started wondering if I was wrong. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon to stay updated with all our latest stories. Your support means the world. If you find this video valuable, please give it a thumbs up. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. Now let's dive into the story. I was 47, with hands that knew the rhythm of pruning roses and kneading bread. I'd been an art teacher once, years ago, before Lucas and I agreed his job as a civil engineer paid better than my dreams ever would. So, I became the one who kept our world steady. I tended the garden until the peonies bloomed like pink promises. I mended his work shirts, stitching buttons back on with care. I volunteered at the local historical society, cataloging faded letters from fishermen's wives, their words curling into my thoughts like whispers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I found joy in the small things, tracing the grain of our oak table, sketching pottery designs I never showed anyone, humming old folk songs while the kettle whistled. Lucas was the practical one. He'd come home with his tie loosened, his dark hair flecked with gray, and make dry jokes about bridge inspections that I'd laugh at even if I didn't understand. He liked his coffee black, his books dog-eared, and his life predictable. We weren't the kind of couple who fought or made scenes. We fit, or so I thought. Lately, though, he'd been quieter, his eyes lingering on his phone instead of me. I told myself it was stress, new projects, long hours. I didn't push. I never pushed. Our house was modest, with creaky stairs and a porch swing that groaned in the wind. I'd painted the kitchen a soft yellow to catch the morning light, and every spring, I'd coax the garden back to life. I didn't mind that we couldn't afford vacations or new cars. We had enough, a savings account that grew slowly, a life we'd built brick by brick. I'd given up my pottery wheel years ago, sold it to cover a hospital bill when Lucas's father got sick. Sometimes, I'd catch myself staring at the corner of the garage where it used to sit, imagining the feel of clay under my fingers. But I'd shake it off, tell myself it was a young woman's hobby, not a life. That morning, I was cleaning out the hall closet, sorting through old coats and scarves. My hands brushed against a crumpled receipt tucked in Lucas's winter jacket. I unfolded it, expecting a grocery list or a gas station stop. Instead, it was for a watch, a brand I didn't recognize, with a price that made my stomach twist. $400. We didn't spend like that, not without talking. I stood there, the paper trembling in my hand, picturing Lucas's wrist, bare as always except for the plain band I'd given him when we married. Why a watch? Why now? I slipped the receipt into my apron pocket, telling myself it was nothing. A gift for someone, maybe, or a mistake. I went back to sorting, but my fingers moved slower, my mind replaying the way Lucas had dodged my questions about his late nights last week. I didn't confront him, not then. I just kept folding, kept breathing, kept believing we were still us. But something had shifted, like a crack in the ice you don't see until it's under your feet. I didn't know it yet, but that receipt was the first thread in a story that would unravel everything I thought I understood about my husband, my home, and the woman I'd forgotten I could be. The day everything changed started like any other, with the kettle humming and the radio murmuring weather updates about a storm rolling in from the Atlantic. I was slicing apples for a pie, the knife steady in my hand, when Lucas walked through the door, his boots still damp from the drizzle outside. He held a gallon of milk in one hand and a lottery ticket in the other, the kind you buy on impulse at the gas station counter. He tossed it onto the kitchen table with a half smile, saying he figured we could use a bit of luck. I laughed, brushing flour off my apron, and told him luck was for people who didn't trust their own hands. But I humored him, grabbing a penny from the jar by the sink. We sat across from each other, the ticket between us, scratching away the silver coating like it was a game. I was teasing him about forgetting the butter I'd asked for when the numbers started to appear. One matched. Then two. Then all of them. $12 million. My breath caught, the pennies slipping from my fingers. Lucas stared at the ticket, his knuckles white around its edges, his face blank as if he'd seen something impossible. I laughed again, nervous, waiting for him to say it was a prank. He didn't. He whispered, "We won," and the room felt smaller, the air heavier. By the end of the week, the lottery office confirmed it. After taxes, $8 million would land in our account. I stood in our kitchen, the same yellow walls glowing under the morning light, and let myself dream. A pottery studio in the garage, maybe, with a wheel that spun my sketches into reality. A trip to Italy to see the cathedrals I'd only read about. Fixing the community center's leaky roof so the kids could have art classes again. I talked fast, my hands waving, picturing us planning together, laughing over blueprints and brochures. Lucas nodded, his eyes on his coffee mug, but he said nothing. I thought he was overwhelmed like me. I was wrong. Days later, I noticed the changes. Lucas quit his job without a word to me. I found out when I saw his work bag tossed in the closet, his badge missing. He started wearing a leather jacket I'd never seen, the kind that looked wrong on a man who used to iron his own khakis. He spent hours on his phone, scrolling luxury car websites, muttering about horsepower and custom rims. He went out at night, meeting people he called consultants, men with names like Bryce and Tanner who I'd never heard of before. When I asked who they were, he shrugged, saying, "Just business, Chloe. You wouldn't get it." One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, I overheard him on the phone in the living room. His voice was low, but the words cut through the air like a blade. "She doesn't get it. This is my chance to start over." My hands froze on the placemats, the fabric crumpling under my fingers. Start over? From what? From me? I stood there, the plates clinking softly as I set them down, pretending I hadn't heard. I turned on the faucet, letting the water drown out his voice, but my chest tightened, a knot I couldn't untie. Later that night, I saw the watch. He'd left it on the bathroom counter, its face gleaming under the light, the same brand as the receipt I'd found. I picked it up, the weight foreign in my hand, and called out, "Lucas, what's this?" He appeared in the doorway, his jaw tight. "It's just a watch, Chloe. It's just money." His voice was sharp, like I'd accused him of something. I set it down, nodding, but my mind wouldn't settle. The receipt, the phone call, the jacket, they were pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Not yet. I went to bed early, staring at the ceiling, the fan spinning shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. I told myself it was just the money, just a phase. But deep down, I knew something had broken, not in me, but in us. And I wasn't sure I could fix it alone. The morning Lucas broke my world apart. I was stirring sugar into my tea, the spoon clinking against the mug like a metronome. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon from the muffins I'd baked, hoping to coax him back to the table to us. He came downstairs in a navy suit I'd never seen, the fabric crisp, his hair slicked back like he was auditioning for a life that wasn't ours. He didn't sit. He stood by the counter, arms crossed, and looked at me with eyes that held no warmth. "Chloe," he said, his voice flat as a closed door, "I don't need a small-town wife anymore. You're holding me back." The words hit like a slap, sharp and sudden. My hands stilled, tea swirling in the cup. I thought I'd misheard, that he'd laugh or explain it away. But he kept talking, calm as if he were reading a grocery list. "I'm selling the house. I've got plans. A mansion by the ocean, a real life. You don't fit in it." He gave me 60 days to leave. No discussion, no compromise. I stared at him, my throat tight, searching for the man who used to hum off-key while mowing the lawn. He was gone. I didn't cry, didn't beg. I nodded, set the spoon down, and walked to the sink, my hands trembling as I rinsed a plate that didn't need washing. The days that followed were a blur of silence and strangeness. Lucas transformed our home into a stage for his new life. He hosted parties, filling the house with strangers who spilled wine on my rugs and laughed too loud. Men in shiny shoes slapped his back, calling him a visionary. Women with painted nails draped themselves on our couch, their perfume lingering like an invasion. I became a ghost in my own home, slipping upstairs to the attic where I'd stashed an old sketchbook. I drew pottery designs, vases with wave patterns, jars for secrets, each line a rebellion against the emptiness below. One afternoon, I came downstairs for water and found a woman in my bathrobe, the blue one I kept folded in the linen closet. She was leaning against the counter, sipping coffee from my favorite mug, her hair dyed auburn and falling in calculated waves. She glanced at me, smirking. "Oh, you're the ex," she said, her voice dripping with pity. Julia, she called herself a friend of Lucas's. My stomach churned, but I didn't answer. I grabbed a glass, filled it, and walked away, her laughter trailing behind me like a taunt. That night, Lucas cornered me in the hallway, his breath sharp with whiskey. "Don't make a scene, Chloe," he said, his tone bored. "This is happening. You'll be fine." I looked at him, his new watch glinting, and realized he didn't see me anymore. Not as a wife, not even as a person. I went to the attic and pulled out a notebook, one I'd used for grocery lists years ago. I started writing. Every expense he mentioned, every name he dropped, every time he left the house past midnight. I didn't know why not yet. It was instinct, like sketching in the dark, a way to hold on to something when everything else was slipping. The parties grew louder, the strangers bolder. Lucas told me to stay out of sight when his guests were over, so I did, locking the attic door, my fingers smudged with pencil lead. I overheard him one night, his voice carrying through the floorboards. "Chloe's irrelevant now. I'm building something bigger." Irrelevant. The words sank into me, heavy as wet clay, but it didn't break me. It sharpened something instead, a spark I hadn't felt in years. I kept sketching, kept writing. The notebook filled with details, a new bank account he'd opened, a realtor's card left on the table, a phone call about a yacht he couldn't possibly afford. I tucked it under a loose floorboard, my heart pounding each time I hit it. Lucas thought he was rewriting our story, erasing me line by line. But I was watching, waiting, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of my own hands, not just folding laundry or pruning roses, but building something he couldn't touch. 60 days felt like a sentence, but I wasn't counting down to surrender. I was counting up every detail, every slip Lucas made, stacking them like stones for a wall I'd build later. The house buzzed with his chaos. Deliveries of gaudy furniture, late-night calls about investments, his laughter sharper than it used to be. I stayed quiet, moving through the rooms like a shadow, my notebook hidden in the attic, its pages thick with his secrets. But I needed more than secrets. I needed a plan. One morning, I slipped out early, the air crisp with autumn and sea salt. I drove to a cafe on the edge of town, where Hannah waited, her silver hair tucked under a scarf, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She was a retired lawyer I'd met at the Historical Society, someone who'd always seen through polite facades. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, just enough. Lucas's lottery win, his new life, his demand that I leave. Her lips pressed thin, and she leaned forward, setting her tea down. "Money doesn't change people, Chloe. It reveals them. What do you want to do about it?" I didn't have an answer, but her question lit something in me, a fuse I hadn't known was there. Hannah offered to look at our finances, anything I could still access. Back home, Lucas was too distracted to notice me logging into our old joint accounts, the ones he hadn't bothered to close. I found transactions that didn't add up, thousands wired to an offshore company, payments labeled consulting to names I didn't recognize. Hannah met me again, this time at her house, her dining table covered in printouts. She showed me how to trace the money, quiet and legal, without leaving a footprint. "He's reckless," she said, tapping a statement. "Men like that think they're untouchable. They're not." One evening, I was printing a credit report when I found it, a loan application for $50,000, my name scrawled at the bottom in a signature that wasn't mine. My pulse hammered as I stared at the screen. Lucas had forged it, tying me to his shady offshore deal without a word. It was illegal, a crack in his armor I hadn't expected. I saved the file, password protected it, and called Hannah. She didn't flinch. "Don't confront him," she said, her voice steady. "Not yet. Let him think you're still lost. That's when he'll make mistakes." I nodded, though she couldn't see me, my hands cold but my mind racing. This wasn't just evidence. It was leverage. Lucas barely looked at me anymore, his days consumed with his mansion deal. He'd show strangers through the house, pointing out walls he'd tear down, views he'd claim. I overheard him bragging about a chandelier he'd ordered, custom-made, worth more than our car. I stopped cooking for him, stopped asking where he went. He didn't notice, too busy measuring our living room for a bar he'd never built. But I was moving too, in ways he couldn't see. I dug out a box from the garage, one I'd packed years ago when I sold my pottery wheel. Inside were sketches, glaze recipes, contacts from art school friends who'd believed in me once. I started calling them, my voice shaky but growing steadier. I told Hannah I wanted to revive my old idea, tied in clay, a pottery business for handmade mugs, vases, keepsakes. She didn't smile, just nodded and handed me a business card. "Riley," she said. "She's a ceramicist local. She'll help you start." Riley met me at a diner, her hands calloused, her laugh warm. She looked at my sketches and didn't hesitate. "These are good, Chloe. Really good. Let's make them real." We spent an afternoon at her studio, shaping clay, talking about glazes that caught the ocean's blues. For the first time in years, I felt my fingers move with purpose, not just duty. Lucas was building his empire on lies and forged papers. I was building mine on clay and truth, piece by piece, and he had no idea. Not yet. The day I left Lucas's house, I didn't look back. Not because I was broken, but because I was done carrying a home that wasn't mine anymore. I packed my sketches, my notebook, a few clothes, and the chipped teapot I'd always loved, then drove to Hannah's guest house on the edge of town. Her place smelled of lavender and old books, and she didn't ask questions when I set my boxes in the spare room. She just handed me a key and said, "Build something, Chloe. You're ready." I wasn't sure I believed her, but I wanted to. Tied in clay came to life faster than I'd dared hope. Riley and I worked late in a rented barn, our hands slick with clay, shaping mugs with wave patterns and jars etched with starfish. I built a website on Hannah's old laptop, simple but warm, with photos of our work glowing against a seafoam background. I posted it online one Sunday, my heart pounding as I hit publish. By Monday, orders trickled in, first 5, then 20. Then a blogger in Portland shared a photo of our keepsake jar, calling it a hug in clay. Her post went viral, and my inbox flooded. I stared at the screen, laughter bubbling up as Riley high-fived me, clay smudging my arm. We couldn't keep up alone, so I hired 2 women from town, Layla and Nora, both artists who'd been scraping by on odd jobs. They brought music to the barn, their voices blending with the hum of the kiln. We laughed over misshapen pots, celebrated when a glaze came out right. I paid them from the first profits, their smiles brighter than the money. Hannah handled the books, her pen scratching as she warned me to pace myself. "Growth is a gift," she said, "but it can choke you if you're not careful." I listened, grateful, my hands steady as I packed orders under the barn's slanted roof. Lucas's world, meanwhile, was cracking. I saw it on the news one night, flipping channels at Hannah's. His offshore investment had collapsed, some fraud scheme tied to a man in Boston. He was suing, his face flushed on the screen, but the reporter's voice was skeptical. I changed the channel not to gloat, but because my work mattered more. I'd caught him bragging about his mansion to a neighbor days before, describing marble floors he hadn't bought yet. Now I heard whispers in town, debts piling, checks bouncing. I kept my head down, wrapping vases in tissue paper, writing thank you notes to customers. Then Lucas called, his voice slurring through Hannah's landline one stormy evening. "Chloe, you gotta help me," he said, words tripping over each other. "The money's tied up, but you know the accounts. Fix this." I froze, the receiver heavy in my hand. He didn't know I'd found the forged loan, didn't know I'd traced his lies. My silence stretched, rain hammering the windows. "Chloe," he snapped, desperate now. I hung up, my pulse racing, and dialed Hannah. I told her everything, the call, the forgery, the leverage I hadn't used yet. She didn't hesitate. "He's scared," she said. "Keep it close. You're not saving him, you're saving yourself." The next week, I leased a storefront in town, a narrow shop with salt-fogged windows. I painted it seafoam green, hung shelves for our pottery, and swept the floors until they gleamed. Riley carved a sign tied in clay, and we nailed it above the door, laughing as it swung crooked. Customers came, not just for mugs but for stories, their hands lingering on jars as they shared memories of lost summers. I listened, nodding, my apron dusted with clay. Lucas thought he'd erased me, but I was shaping something new, something that held weight. One afternoon, I locked the shop and stood outside, the ocean breeze tugging my hair. The sign creaked above me, steady despite the wind. I didn't need Lucas's mansion or his millions. I had a foundation, clay under my nails, orders stacking up, women who worked beside me like sisters. He was falling, but I was rising, and for the first time, I knew the difference between surviving and living. Hannah's voice crackled through the phone one gray morning, sharp with urgency. "Chloe, the mansion's back on the market." Lucas's deal fell apart. Debts, lawsuits, the works. He's desperate. I stood in the shop, a half-glazed mug in my hand, the clay cool against my palm. The mansion, his obsession, his trophy, was slipping from his grasp. I set the mug down, my mind racing, and called Victoria, a realtor I'd known from the Historical Society. "I want to see it," I said. She paused, her tone careful. "Lucas's place?" I didn't flinch. "Yes. Today." Victoria met me at the property, a sprawling house perched on a cliff, its windows catching the ocean's glint. The lawn was wild, overgrown with weeds, and the front gate sagged on its hinges. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with old cologne and neglect. A chandelier flickered in the foyer, its crystals dulled by dust. Lucas had called it his future, but it looked like a dream left to rot. Victoria trailed behind me, her heels clicking on scuffed marble. "Why this house, Chloe?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I ran a hand along a banister, its wood still warm with possibility. "It's not about him," I said. "It's about what I can build." I made an offer that afternoon, low but calculated, guided by Hannah's advice to aim for his weak spot. Lucas was drowning, taxes unpaid, creditors circling, his Florida schemes unraveling in court. Victoria called 2 days later, her voice tight with disbelief. "He accepted. Didn't even negotiate. He just wants out." I leaned against the shop counter, a smile tugging at my lips. Lucas didn't know it was me. Not yet. I signed the papers at Victoria's office, my pen steady, the forged loan documents tucked in a folder nearby, just in case. Then he showed up. I was reviewing the deed, Victoria across from me, when the door slammed open. Lucas stood there, his face red, a crumpled newspaper in his fist. "You," he shouted, his voice breaking. "You're stealing my house?" I met his gaze, calm, unflinching. "I'm buying it, Lucas. Fair and legal." He stepped closer, pointing, his breath sour with panic. "This is sabotage. I'll sue you." Victoria cleared her throat, sliding a copy of the forged loan across the table. "You might want to rethink that," she said, her tone ice. Lucas froze, his eyes darting to the paper, then to me. He knew I had him. He stormed out, the door rattling behind him, leaving silence in his wake. I walked the mansion again the next day, alone this time. The walls echoed, but not with loss, with potential. I saw a flagship for Tide and Clay, a gallery for our pottery, workshops in the sunroom, community nights by a restored fireplace. I hung a sign outside, hand-painted by Riley, Tide and Clay Haven, where stories are shaped. It swung in the breeze, catching the light. The house wasn't Lucas's anymore. It wasn't even mine. It was ours, mine, Riley's, Layla's, Nora's, every customer who'd held our work and felt something true. Back at the shop, I packed orders with Layla, her chatter filling the air. She didn't know about the mansion yet, but I caught her sketching a vase design on a napkin, her pencil sure. I smiled, tucking it away to frame later. Lucas thought he'd written me out of his story, but I was rewriting mine, in clay and wood and sea-worn stone. The mansion wasn't a prize, it was a stage, and I was ready to fill it with voices he'd never silenced. That night, I stood on the cliff behind the house, the ocean churning below. The wind carried salt and freedom, and I let it sink into me. I'd bought more than walls. I'd bought a beginning. Lucas was gone, his threats empty, his empire ash. I turned back to the house, its windows glowing faintly, and walked inside, my steps firm on the floor I'd claimed. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation, and I was just getting started.